Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
Hello, this is John Bicknell. We are pleased to bring to you this special 90-minute bonus episode of the Cognitive Crucible. On October 29th of 2020, the Information Professionals Association and the AFCEA Alamo chapter co-hosted a virtual panel entitled Combating Disinformation in a Competitive Information Environment. This star-studded panel of senior government personnel and thought leaders spotlights the current pivot toward a convergence approach to improve our competitive advantage across the strategic and operational environments. For those interested in following along, the slide deck is linked in the show notes. The panel moderator is Mr. Austin Branch, who is co-founder of the Information Professionals Association. And the panelists include Ms. Lynn Patrick, who is Technical Director at the 16th Air Force in San Antonio, Dr. Brian Pierce, Visiting Research Scientist at the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, also known as ARLIS, and Dr. Pierce also was formerly at DARPA, Lieutenant General retired Ed Carden, who's former commander of U.S. Army Cyber Command and commander of JTF Ares, Mr. Rob Bussian, Director for Cyber and Strategic Enabling in the Concepts, Development and Management Office under the Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force, Mr. Bob Pearson, who is a social media expert and thought leader, author, professor, and digital consultant, and finally, Mr. Joe Kelly, who is also at ARLIS and is president of Point Weaver. And now on to the panel discussion.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Lipsey, president of Alamo AFCEA. Welcome to today's joint Alamo AFCEA IPA virtual panel session on combating disinformation. Alamo AFCEA is a professional association for individuals who are in the cybersecurity, IT, and intelligence space. Next slide, please. We exist to provide an ethical forum for people in government, the military, industry, and academia to collaborate in an ethical way. During COVID, we put our priority on individual safety, and so we've really doubled up on the number of events we're doing. We're just doing it all virtually. And as a service to community, we've made all of these events free and open to anyone that wants to participate. We'd encourage you to check out our website, alamoafcea.org, for future events that we have coming up. We could not do these events without our sponsors, and so we want to take an opportunity to thank our Luncheon sponsors for all that they do to support us throughout the year. Without their contributions, we would not be able to put on series like the one that you're enjoying today. As I mentioned earlier, Alamo AFCEA is a connecting organization. We're committed to assembling professionals with diverse backgrounds across government, industry, and academia to advance national security. Today, you're going to have an opportunity to hear from a distinguished panel of experts on the information environment. We're able to do this through the support of the Information Professionals Association, who are jointly sponsoring today's panel session. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. John Bicknell of IPA.
Thank you, Rick, and good morning, everyone. I'm John Bicknell, the Vice President for the Information Professionals Association, or IPA. IPA is a nonprofit organization founded a couple of years ago to fill a specific need, cognitive security. Our founders are a diverse group of military information operators, academics, researchers, Hill staffers, thought leaders, businessmen and women, and policymakers. We formed IPA to call attention to and advocate for cognitive security, which was a gaping hole in national security advocacy. So we're collaborating with organizations like ARLIS, and you'll hear more about this later today, working on new ways to bring together hard and soft science providing a networking forum to advance critical thought relative to cognitive security and the information environment. For example, you'll hear more about rekindling the Phoenix Challenge later today. Plus, we recently launched a podcast called The Cognitive Crucible, which I hope everybody will check out, and you can find out more information at information-professionals.org. Plus, we have other exciting initiatives that we will be rolling out in 2021, which you will hear more about. In short, we are at the nexus of creating a whole of government or whole of society effort to counter the information threat. And we too are so grateful to be working with other companies that get it and share our concern. Companies like Lexington Solutions Group, who was an early supporter of IPA, plus SOCI, Parsons, Sienna Management Solutions, Booz Allen Hamilton. Thank you to the great leaders and patriots in these companies without whom we could not pursue our mission. And with this, back over to you, Rick.
Thanks very much, John. I do appreciate that very much. If you haven't read our panelists' bios, I encourage you to check them out in the events section of the Alamo AFCEA website. Today's panel moderator is Mr. Austin Branch. Next slide, please. Mr. Branch is the Executive Director of Information Strategy and Programs for Colsa Corporation. Prior to joining Colsa, he served 30 years as an Army officer and senior civilian. Among many distinctions throughout his career, he was the Army's first information operations officer. He also served in the senior executive service at OSD, both as a senior advisor for DoD information operations, and then as the first senior director for the information operations and military information support defense enterprise. In addition, he is one of the founders of the Information Professionals Association. Austin, it's a great privilege to have you here. The cyberspace is yours.
Hey, thanks so much, Rick, and for the introduction, and welcome to everybody that's joined this event. And I'm aware that there's a broad audience attending this second installment from AFCEA, Alamo, and IPA, oriented on competition in the information environment. Now, today, we're going to focus on select organizations in the Department of Defense as they work to build capacity and harness a growing enterprise of private, academic, government, and our foreign partners who are actively developing, testing, and innovating in this complex information space. And specifically, we'll focus with regard to tackling the challenges and the impact of disinformation. You know, we all see and read and hear about the host of technological innovations and efforts from across the defense enterprise, our labs, our service institutions, partners, academia, and importantly, the private sector with regard to developing capabilities and potential solutions in this space, from AI to many others. But often these are not connected. They're developed in silos, but they often also serve similar requirements. Today's objective is part of an effort to share with the information community of interest a snapshot of select organizations and efforts working to kind of tighten the shock group in this regard and working important solutions to improve Department of Defense ability to compete in the information environment and meet the challenges and effects of disinformation on our national security interests. Today's discussion flow is simple. We'll first begin with a macro view from the Defense Science Board summer study that really focused on the great power competition and had a panel that really dove into the details of the competition in the IE, in the information environment. That'll be led by Bob Pearson, a digital media innovator, pioneer of social media marketing, and working with Dell and Novartis, chairman of the Next Practices Group, and senior advisor to the Global Engagement Center, and a selected member of the Defense Science Board on this study I just mentioned. He's going to highlight some of the considerations and recommendations from the board. He'll be followed by Mr. Rob Abussian, a senior leader in the Department of the Air Force, the Director for Cyber and Strategic Enabling in the Concepts and Development Management Office under SAF-AA. He's got years of experience in the intelligence community and leadership in this space, and we're very excited to hear about where the Air Force is headed, specifically with SAF-CDM's interest in advancing capabilities in the IE. After that, after we look at the service perspective, we'll turn to Lynn Patrick. She's the Chief Technology Officer for the 16th Air Force and formerly the Director of 24th Air Force, our Cyber Technology Office, and another senior leader with immense experience and time in this space. And integrating and developing capacity, not only in cyber, but now with the broader information needs for the Air Force. She'll be followed by Dr. Brian Pierce and Lieutenant General Ed Cardone. Dr. Pierce, former Director for Information Innovation at DARPA, and leads our Cognitive Security Proving Ground at the Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security. Lieutenant General Ed Cardone, obviously most of all of you know, is a former commander of U.S. Army Cyber, first commander of Joint Task Force Ares, and a senior Army and Joint leader in not only cyber, but all information electronic warfare and all aspects of this very important mission area. He's also a senior leader at ARLIS and will be joining Dr. Pierce in the representation of that organization's and new UARC at the University of Maryland's efforts in this regard. Finally, we'll close with Mr. Joe Kelly, who's ARLIS senior leader, he'll describe the reinstitution or the reestablishment of Phoenix Challenge, former director for IO policy in USDI, and a pioneer in information-related policies, capabilities, and development for decades. So with that, I want to take the opportunity to introduce and kick off with Mr. Bob Pearson talking from the Defense Science Board. Bob?
Thank you, Austin, and it's great to be here and to reflect on what we learned in the Defense Science Board. I would frame it like this. We know that a new threat mix is emerging. You know, when we look at our adversaries, we look at all the ways that they can employ cyber, how they can use disinformation, how they use new techniques, new models, new ways to deceive, and there's quite a big offering. But the key thing for us is we realize that really we're in the lukewarm war. We are, if you're an adversary, you're using cyber and you're using combating disinformation together, and you're looking at all different kinds of mixes that you can put together. So I would say that is falls into the clear and obvious camp when you really get down to it. So the question is, what do you do about it? And at the same time that we're thinking about this, we know that our military services are pivoting on how to best support this environment. And so our answer is to recommend the building of the Joint Information Warfare Engineering Laboratory. And if you want to think about it as a way that you aggregate and accelerate innovation. So how do we take the best thinking from the private sector, not make the mistake that just because something was built in the private sector, it automatically works in the public sector. We know that's not the case. But we do know that what works in the private sector may inspire how we innovate in the public sector. We also know what we're doing in the public sector, or in academia, may inspire us to actually innovate as well. And so this is a way that we can actually harness the thinking of the best digital experts, the best solutions, the best models, and then figure out what will actually work for us in the environments that we work in. If we go to the third bullet here, with private sector approaches that could be used in public sector solutions. I won't go through all of these, but if you imagine work that's already done in the private sector on market-based taxonomies, we could actually be mapping out every single square inch of what the Belt and Road Initiative does anywhere in the world, any project, any person, any official, and understand all of the weak points of that initiative immediately in terms of what we can see. If we look at new software that's out there, we have the ability now for the good actor side of the world to actually, take 3 or 4 hours of video, do it in a certain pattern, and actually be able to create thousands of videos out of those 3 or 4 hours. Well, that's a completely new way to approach things. It doesn't exist in the market today, and we could be the ones actually doing that. And then if you look at, proxy networks and other things like that, it's become increasingly easy to work backwards in the supply chain and really understand who is actually shaping behavior and look at what we are capable of either shutting down or minimizing over time. So that list goes on and on. But the key thing is that we're looking at what's that mashup of public, private, and academia to actually make a difference. And I know we have speakers on today from Arliss, great example with Arliss of academia taking that next step to push innovation in cognitive security and beyond. The other thing is that we have an opportunity to develop new intelligence capabilities because of all the data that's coming out, partly because of techniques that are better at scraping the dark web and can combine with open source media, but also partly because we're getting much better at taking disparate data sets and getting them to talk to each other so we can get insights that we may not have had even a couple of years ago. And when you combine that with the explosion of 5G and sensors around the world, the number of data sources that we'll have at our disposal is only going to go up exponentially. So this is an area where we can stay on top of this and we can actually build capabilities that will put us ahead. And that leads us to the last point I want to make on this is one of the things that we can also see is that if we employ psychological modeling, better intelligence with storytelling, we are absolutely capable of outmaneuvering and outthinking the adversaries who are taking, in many respects, a long game with asymmetric warfare to kind of desensitize us, to disinform us, to get us to act in different ways. And we're much smarter than that and are very capable of leapfrogging. But it comes back to the conclusion we had with the Defense Science Board, which is we don't need to do another startup. We don't need to build something that's tremendous. We need to actually just create this concept that can be started up as soon as we want, that can actually then aggregate the best of public and private sectors, push that innovation in as quickly as we can into the places where we need it, learn from what we're already doing, and basically turn this into a lab that is continually making a difference. So we have, I think, a great opportunity in front of us. Time will tell exactly how we pull that off, but that was our conclusion for our area of the Defense Science Board summer study. Austin, what I'll now do is we love to take questions when we get to Q&A, but I'll now turn it over to Rob Bussian. Rob?
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that very much. Hi, this is Rob Bussian. I go by Bus. As Austin offered in his introduction, the Director for Cyber and Strategic Enabling inside the Air Force Secretariat's Concept Development Management Office. I just want to give you a little bit of background because I don't know how many of you know of or may ask, well, what is CDM? And thanks for including me, Austin, in the Information Professional Association on the esteemed board here. What's interesting is to Lynn, Ed, Bob, Joe, Austin, and Brian, is what you realize is this is a very small circle. Worked with many of these folks in the past in different capacities, and what you find is these are all professionals interested in moving this critical space of the information environment forward from not only a DoD perspective and parlance, but broader from a U.S. government responsibility. So a little bit about CDM very quickly. I just included this to show the lineage of the organization. We've actually been an activity that's been in place since the early 90s, aligned into OSD. As my director, and many of you may know the name John Salvatore, identifies, we've really been a skunk works activity, predominantly supporting into the intelligence and security communities over the years. With the advent and establishment of USDI, we are aligned there under Dr. Steve Cambone's responsibilities when that was first stood up within OSD. Most of our work was into Black and sensitive activities programs. I like to say, for those of you, and I'm sure there's several of us out there that grew up in the same time frame of the late baby boomers, we're like BASF. You know, we don't make it, but we make it better. And I think that's a pretty good description for the organization. In the early 2000s, we really came out more into the gray and what I'll call the white space in our activities and development, supporting broadly across DoD components, intelligence community, agencies, and broader collective through the federal government. And decision made in about the 2015 timeframe to get a lot of the program execution off of the OSD staff, and a decision was made to align us as a complete entity into the Air Force, aligned under the Air Force Secretariat, with still responsibility not only now to Air Force programs, but more importantly and broadly across DoD components, and to continue that support. And so here we are today. A little bit of background and competencies of the organization: was working in the areas of physical and virtual access. People like Joe Kelly, Director of Cyber within USDI, had close working relationships. Today, we support not only inside the Air Force, 16th Air Force, but also broadly across components in the United States Cybercom. So for those of you who know, at the unclassified level, efforts such as Crash Header, now the Army's JCAP program, were intricately involved in support to those. We also have an entire group that works in the field of advanced analytics and have worked across many of the three-letter agencies over the years. That's predominantly located down in Tampa, but continues work to this day. And then finally, in the areas of network development and management. So those of you who may know the BICES program, as well as mission partner environments, we have the responsibility for the life cycle management for those programs. Okay, next slide. And this is really what I want to talk about. I was just coming up and made it up here just in time from our research and development campus down on the Potomac in Maryland. I spent a lot of time driving around the Beltway. The weather today certainly made that a challenge, but I spent a lot of my commute time from more western side of Virginia into the Pentagon most days, thinking a lot about this issue of influence. I think this is, as you see Secretary Esper start to embrace and drive this concept of strategic influence. From a DoD perspective, we have to look at it an even broader one. So a couple seminal pieces for me that apply still today, and I'm going to bring it up to a strategic level, is if we look at Clausewitzian theory of on war, Clausewitz stated that war is politics by other means. And that's no less relevant today. He talks in his remarkable trinity about the aspects of the objectives and power of the government, legitimacy affected by the will and sentiment of the people, and then the capability of its military forces. And I would say and contend that over the years and decades, in many cases, the focus has been on that issue of military capabilities. And as I appreciated General Dave Goldfein, the now just retired Chief of Staff for the Air Force, said in his first keynote speech at the Air Force Association convention, he said, folks, we focused over the past 100 years on wars of attrition. We now move into the century of wars of cognition. And I think that's critical that we recognize and understand. So when we talk about information and disinformation, that we wholly recognize that there's been a shift in where focus and attention will be applied. And that's no different than what I see as the digital transformation inside the Department of Defense. The other one I'd like to highlight is, and I know many of you on the forum know Dr. Rand Waltzman, who used to be at DARPA working under Dr. Brian Pierce, and now over at RAND. And for me, it was a seminal piece that Rand Waltzman published back in about the 2017 timeframe on the issue of the need for a cognitive security center. And as Rand described cognitive security, back to Bob's points a minute ago, is the proliferation of mechanisms that the advent of this thing called the internet created. Never before have we seen the ability now to drive influence and information at the levels and scale and with precision that exists today. So I really think as a department, this is in some ways a whole new mission space for us as we look at the advent of social media companies, et cetera. There's an argument that says, is there a regulatory body and focus needed like we did with AT&T and the breakup of Ma Bell as a public utility perspective? I don't know the right answers to that, but what I do know is in the areas of malign influence that we've been working closely, supporting the U.S. Cybercom over the past few years on the issue of influence to our elections, et cetera, what we find is we're really in this challenge of cognitive bias. And the adversary's been in this space for decades. They've exercised and practiced on their own societies and populace, and it's just now transferring to us. And we really are in an arms race for influence. I argue that just based on our naivete of our open society, we hadn't recognized we're in that arms race until recently. You folks, obviously, as information professionals, have been there for years. But I think what you find is a collective department and broader U.S. government that's now woke to the issues at hand. So we look forward to, I'm thrilled to be up here at ARLIS in the heavy focus within the cognitive security proving ground that you're going to hear about. I take a lot of satisfaction that my organization in support to USD-INS was able to establish and align the UARC here at University of Maryland in this space. And I see, as Bob talks about the need for the engineering center, the partnerships that can occur, and the alignment and application that we can affect through ARLIS in this space as a critical function for the entirety of the Department of Defense and the federal workforce. So I look forward to questions and answers as well within the session. I'd like to turn it over now to Lynn Patrick, the CTO Technical Director within 16th Air Force. Lynn's background there in San Antonio has been working in this space, whether under an AFCEA or AIA precursor to all of this. And again, Lynn, great to have you on the line. And again, as I mentioned, it's a small circle within the community.
Great, and thank you very much, Bess. Good morning, all, and thank you to Rick and Austin and all the panel members. So excited to be here today. On behalf of Lieutenant General Hawk, it provides us the opportunity to give you a little bit of the 16th Air Force focus on tasks and approaches and the way we're looking at convergence, and then disinformation in the information environment as a whole. So a lot of changes, a lot of things going on. So what is the 16th Air Force focus when it comes to a convergent approach? It's designed to improve our competitive advantage across not only our strategic, operational, and tactical environments, but it specifically goes after the cyber-enabled information space. Understanding our adversary is a foundation to information warfare in 16th Air Force. So we look at linking our authorities and our partnerships to deliver options that would gear the outcomes on exposing the adversary's actions and denying them the plausible deniability. Lieutenant General Hawk provided some information in the summer 2020 cyber review. I'm going to read a little bit of the 16th Air Force task, and he states there the task of 16th Air Force is to synchronize cyber, ISR, EW, and IO across the continuum of cooperation, competition, and conflict, and support the joint forces' ability to compete, deter, and win wars across multiple domains. Very, very key, great messaging out to everyone there. But as you go along those paths and look at it, you've got to understand also then, in order for us to apply that and do that, you have to understand what are the adversary's goals. Right now, the adversary in the current state we are in is to degrade political will and to generate internal conflict while creating plausible deniability necessary to avoid the international responsibility that's out there. The Air Force, specifically 16th Air Force, must adopt this approach that enables a clear focus on a more global view and uses access to data very key across many of the different aspects of the information warfare capabilities that are out there. If we effectively integrate those capabilities, it enables our partners across the DoD and other US government entities to counter the growing threat that's out there that faces us now. The Secretary of the Air Force, very key and instrumental, he established 16th Air Force to converge those capabilities and activities into what we call the information environment. Tying in the convergence is key if you understand. And when you look at countering disinformation, convergence provides the potential to go along those paths and look at disinformation. The adversary, remember, is to supplement our logic. It's to replace fact with fantasy and fear, and it's thus saturates our information environment with lies. Pretty blunt, but very true. We encounter this by adhering to our inherent strengths, the strengths of who we are and what we are across an IW realm and environment of core values of our nation, and also speaking the truth. Folks need to hear where it is and where we're going. What does 16th Air Force do? And this is along a technologist type aspect out there to you all. We use our cyber teams. We develop options to impose on the adversary. We use our DCGS environment to employ problem-centric approaches. We use our cyber defense airmen. They expose and malign cyber activity, targeting systems analysis and non-kinetic intelligence. There are other aspects within 16th Air Force that also are working on our PAI, our publicly available information. They are doing this to gain insight and develop a tradecraft to expose what's going on in the disinformation of our world. I was asked to bring up a couple different technologies and capabilities that we're using to share. One of the ones that's out there that probably is near and dear to many, or they know a lot about, is the JADC. That is the Joint All-Domain Command and Control. And this is a concept that's out there, and it links sensors. Besides the material means of aspects of using things and going out and addressing this, it really is truly a shift in our doctrine to agile network solutions. More to follow, but I'll try not to go too in-depth. What are some of the other IW capabilities? We have to understand that the adversary is knocking at the door. It's engaging the U.S. and the U.S.'s information environment. We have to have control of the narrative. So, looking at and sourcing our adversary's actions, redefining what is a combined arms means in the 21st century of warfare. One aspect right now that folks are very familiar with is in 2016, we did have a Russian-based research agency, the IRA, exploiting social media to target our U.S. elections. Another was recently with China, and it's leveraging the COVID-19 pandemic to expand its influence through full spectrum and IW activities. Very key, very near. It not only affects those of us within the government, the DoD, it affects the academia industry and the community out there as a whole. If you take away anything, and in a short summary of what we're doing is we've got to gain the initiative of the information environment that's out there. We have to have a new approach to warfighting. We have to increase our competition. Through the U.S. government partnerships, we are able to do that. And like I said, the scope of academia, industry, and government, we can't do it by ourselves. We have to strongly use those resources that are out there that are willing to partner with us and bring it further and address the threat. Joint forces will need to integrate IW capabilities at a relevant speed. There's very key, relevant speed of the information environment. If I leave you with one closing thought, because I'd like to have the time for questions, 16th Air Force's approach to convergence in the information environment offers many new opportunities. Again, partnerships among DoD, interagencies, coalition partners will produce new IW outcomes now and in the future. Appreciate your time here today, and I look forward to questions. And now I'll transition this over to a broader perspective with General Cardone and also Dr. Brian Pierce from Applied Research Lab.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. It's really a pleasure to be here, and really a privilege as well. So General Cardone and I are going to cover the next section. I'll start off with a short presentation that basically frames what ARLIS is doing, and of course, General Cardone can provide deeper insights. So my presentation here consists of two parts. First, I thought it's useful to go through definitions of cognitive security, information environment, and operations in the information environment, or OIE. Second, I'll then describe the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence Security, or ARLIS, as the premier strategic university-affiliated research center, or UARC, in integrating social behavioral sciences, AI, data science, and advanced computing for novel socio-technical solutions that overcome hard national security challenges. And of course, our focus today is on the challenges of cognitive security and operations in the information environment. Foundational to ARLIS's research, engineering, test evaluation, and wargaming in cognitive security and OIE is the Cognitive Security Proving Ground, or CSPG, which will conclude the talk for me, at least in terms of the presentation. So now we're at the next chart. Leave it here. In this chart, black symbology represents a malicious influencer, and blue a susceptible individual or population. The malicious influencer is shown here with a message or set of messages and the assistance of a machine, such as a software-based agent or bot on a computer. The message often includes disinformation in the form of manipulated media. Now, cognitive security is not just strengthening the resilience of the individual and population against malicious influence, but also countering the activities of malicious influencers which include insider threats using WikiLeaks as an example. So in summary, cognitive security is really old and new. It is old in terms of Sun Tzu's famous dictum, all warfare is based on deception, with cognitive security essential to not being deceived by disinformation. It is certainly new through the exponential expansion of the internet, which has boosted our productivity to incredible heights, but also has opened new avenues for bad actors to try to influence us and threaten our cognitive security at unprecedented scale and speed. The information environment in which all this takes place is complex and dynamic. This environment comprises and aggregates numerous social, cultural, cognitive, technical, and physical attributes that act upon and are impacted by knowledge, understanding, beliefs, worldviews, and ultimately actions of an individual, group, system, community, or organization. Next chart, please. The information environment is part of a much larger space encompassing many dimensions, including cyber, social, behavioral, legal, political, economic, of course, as well as military. The depiction of the multidimensional space on the left side of this chart is really constrained by the bounds on the size of the chart and is not limited by the dimensions shown here. And ideally, courses of action are pursued that are synchronized across all these dimensions. Now that's ideally, of course. The information environment is represented by the figure on the right, which consists of three familiar layers: 1, cognitive, 2, information, and 3, physical. The cognitive layer refers to the people comprising the US and allies in shades of blue, adversaries in red, and other populations in green, who are all the focus of the actions and assessment for cognitive security and operations in the information environment. Now, these people include those in media outlets, as well as key influencers, critical groups, and mass audiences. The information layer comprises the data and information that is processed to make sense and take action. The physical layer consists of the equipment, networks, and hardware and software that collect and disseminate the data and information. Now, the two-headed arrows between the different groups, intra-group and intergroup in the chart, illustrate that there are numerous paths involving interactions between members of the groups. This complexity underscores the challenge of higher order effects and unintended consequences, which takes us to the operations in the information environment. Next chart, please. So stated simply, operations in the information environment comprise the sequence of actions conducted by organizations tailored to use information for the purpose of affecting the perceptions, attitudes, and other drivers of relevant actor behavior. The chart shows at a top level the complex multidimensional operational space on the left and the decision maker on the right, or decision makers, plural, who are challenged in making sense of the operational space and taking actions in this space. And ARLIS is certainly working to meet these challenges. Next slide, please. ARLIS's vision is to be the premier strategic UARC in sciences, AI, data science, and advanced computing for novel socio-technical solutions that overcome hard national security challenges. Now, this involves not only holistic integration of tools, models, and data sets, but the translation of operational needs into problems that can be addressed by industry in the lower right and academia in the upper right, such as ARLIS's University Consortium, which expands the capabilities of ARLIS beyond just the University of Maryland. Our focus today is, of course, on ARLIS's research, engineering, test evaluation, and wargaming for cognitive security and OIE. And foundational to these lines of effort is the development of a cognitive security proving ground, or CSPG. Next chart, please. The cognitive security proving ground really will reduce risk on solutions to overcoming cognitive security and OIE challenges before their use in the real world. And you're not going to replace the real world. The whole idea is, can we reduce that risk and narrow down the possibilities of what might be effective? So as shown by the three examples of challenges on the left, these challenges range from operational validation to research and experimentation to full campaign design as a goal in the future. And based on ARLIS's strength in human subjects research, we are positioned now to address operational validation involving human subjects. And in response to the second challenge, we have a project related, for example, to narrative propagation. Arliss's participation in cyber war games is helping us build expertise towards full campaign design. The Proving Ground seeks to do all of this through experiments, simulations, and test and evaluation in a secure, controlled environment, which can consist of groups of real people, as shown in the shaded region in the chart. And in the future, we see real people, of course, working with software-based agents or bots to create a much greater scale. Next chart. So the three challenges mentioned in the prior chart are developed here in much greater detail as exemplary use cases. And just to highlight one on the left, and I know Ed will elaborate a little more on use cases and their relevance, of course, and concern to the operational user. But the leftmost use case is a typical challenge that confronts operators when looking to use a tactical capability, but really have no insight as to whether it will work. And oftentimes, they then don't even pursue it if they don't have the opportunity to test it out. The intent would be the Cognitive Security Proving Ground would be able to conduct the experiments to provide this type of insight. And I'll leave the other two for further discussion. Next chart, please. So we aim to simulate the information environment using a flexible, live, virtual, constructive architecture. The figure for the information environment is shown again here on the left, with a Venn diagram comprising the figure on the right, which illustrates different combinations of live, virtual, and constructive for research engineering, test evaluation, and wargaming in a simulated information environment. And again, based on Arliss's strength in human subjects research, we are positioned now to provide the live element of the architecture, and we are in the process of developing the resources to realize the virtual and constructive elements. So in summary, the Cognitive Security Proving Ground and associated Arliss capabilities will help enhance and sustain US and ally advantage in cognitive security and operations in the information environment to detect, deter, defend against, and counter malicious influence activities hostile to the United States and allies. So with that, that concludes the presentation. Let me now turn it over to General Cardone.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks as always. That's quite smooth. And to the other panelists, just an honor to be here with you, and to AFCEA and IPA, thanks so much for hosting what I think is a very important conference. So first, building on Bob's comment, you know, the technology's here, it's more about concepts. And then there's the other pieces, do they actually work? And then, Lynn, I loved your idea of convergence. You know, the idea of, there's this idea out there for years that there was an operations environment and an information environment. And from operating in both environments, you know, the information environment generally was a bit of an afterthought compared to what we've done in the operations environment. But what's happening is the information environment is clearly starting to have huge impacts on the operations environment. And for that, you know, I want to talk a little bit about Task Force Ares. It was an offensive cyber task force against ISIS. Tim Hogg, you're out there. Tim was a deputy, fantastic. Steve Donald, the chief of staff, those two really instrumental in making this what it was. But the first problem we had was we don't have a way to understand if we could achieve the effects. In other words, when we have this, will it work? And then have we actually tested this, or is that just somebody's idea that it would work? And did we test it on the population upon which it was designed? The next piece is, what's the operational concept for employing these things? What does that look like? And then what are the policy issues or the risk? And the reason that comes up is as we brief these operations up the chain, and the answer to that question is, will it work? Well, we're not sure. Have you tested it? No. What's the concept? Well, we're going to try this. Are there policy issues? Well, there's a number of issues, but we don't know them all. What are the risks? Well, with that number of unknowns, would you approve the mission? And so this is one of the challenges that the three of us and the entire staff in Cybercom and DoD and the National Security Council were working through to solve some of these problems. And so from that, what we realized is, what Brian just briefed, we need a proving ground. And to why Arliss? Because Arliss a UARC. And it has the social science component, so it can do human testing, as Brian said. But also it can be a bit of a Switzerland between the government, academia, and industry, because there's all kinds of issues with the sharing of data with the public sector, the government sector, international, and having a place where people can come in and have frank conversations on this is really, really important. The other problem that's out there is there's a number of DARPA programs over the years with information technologies. There's a number of programs in all the service labs that have done this, but they don't transition well because there's no home for them. And so what happens is they fall on the floor and they're left in the lab. And then when you actually need stuff, we're scrambling around for the first couple of weeks, months, to try to figure out what's out there, instead of building a repository that has capabilities on the shelf that have been tested operationally. We know the policy issues and we know the risk factors. So are people interested in this? Absolutely, because it's not just an idea. We're already connected to, United Army Special Operating Forces, to the 1st Special Forces Command, U.S. Army, to Special Operations Command down in Tampa, to Cybercom, to PEO STRI, to the NAWIC, to the J39, to OSD, and everywhere we go, there's great interest in what we're doing. So we're ready now to take these use cases and put them in this proving ground to deliver some real results. And so with that, I'll pass it on to the next speaker. I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
All right, Ed, thank you very much. So to sort of wrap it all up here, I'm Joe Kelly, here to introduce the reboot of Phoenix Challenge, courtesy of ARLIS and the Information Professionals Association. So having already scanned through the attendees, I know there's a number of folks that recognize what this conference used to be, the Premier Information Operations Conference, and I think it highly appropriate that it is the Alamo chapter that is hosting this announcement of the revival of Phoenix Challenge, because it was the 688th wing down there in San Antonio that was USDI's partner in sponsoring the original conference series from 2002 to roughly 2012. So very glad to see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list today. What we're trying to do is to jump back in where USDI and the 688th had left off 8 years ago. We had an opportunity to bring together everyone from DoD, the intelligence community, allies, industry and academia, to really go through the big challenges of operating in the information environment. And what we will do now in kicking this off is we are partnering with Central Command's Worldwide I/O Conference. We will set this up as a one-day unclassified online event that will serve as a lead-in to Central Command's classified Worldwide I/O Conference. And the goal here is to rebuild a conference series that allows us to tackle these challenges that you've heard about from our previous panelists, to really get the communities back together and operating in a way where we can do this together. As we look ahead to the future, we'll move beyond online events, but for now, in the COVID era, this seems to be the best approach. We will be doing some plenary sessions on this one-day event, but then with tracked panels with breakouts to allow for real conversation and real discussion among all the different participants, so that you really feel that you get something concrete and can replicate some of the networking that was so essential to the original Phoenix Challenge series. Some of the draft topics we're looking at, these will change obviously as speakers and topics evolve. Our global competition with those peer competitors that we face, and how we manage that, and operations short of conflict, how you shape the information environment. Looking at things like strategic information effects and how we really can do shaping within the limits of policy and solve some of those challenges. We'll also be looking at some key things that we're looking at ARLIS in terms of risk-based approaches to insider threat, acquisition security, supply chain security, where we have a number of projects ongoing. And then offering that opportunity for the commercial sector to come in, tell us about technology trends, but then we can have the conversation amongst ourselves about where that can fit in terms of operational support tools. As we finalize the details, look at informationprofessionals.org and at the arlis.umd.edu website. There will be nothing there yet. Give us a couple of weeks here to set up the webpage announcements. But you can follow on for topics there, and look forward to reconnecting with everyone as early next year when we move into the process. So with that, I will turn it back over to Austin to take us through questions and answers. And I would strongly encourage someone other than my good buddy Clem Danish to ask a question in the Q&A. Clem seems to be dominating the process so far. So, well, Austin, back to you.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, everybody. And yes, please, as now's the time to start posting your questions. Look, what we try to do here is just hit a wave top of points from leaders that are working in the space. Look, we know there are many other organizations working diligently to create capability, methods, applications, organizational constructs to be able to compete and work in this space. Not only in the DoD, but as already mentioned, in the private sector for their own interests, to protect their information and cognitive security requirements. But I would argue if we're going to be at the national level with our partners to be able to protect our interest in this space, that it's an all-in proposition, that it's a network of networks that have to have common understanding and common orientation. While we are all sometimes developing capability and technologies in these silos, being able to kind of tighten up our shock group will give us the greater opportunity to be more competitive in this space. And so with that, I wanted to make sure that we just touched on the various organizations on this panel and all those connection points where we can offer platforms for collaboration, sharing, and trying again to create this network of organizations and individuals to be able to effectively protect our interests in this space. With that, let's go ahead and begin some of the Q&A. We've been at it for about an hour. We've got a little bit of time we built in for Q&A based on our previous experience. Let's take some time and work through the questions. So Kayla, over to you.
Thanks, Austin. Our first question is for Bob Pearson. You have on your slide asymmetric warfare. Would you say that adversaries and information competitors are using less restrictive instead of asymmetric?
Yeah, it's a great question from Clem, I believe. And here's how I look at it. Let's look at Russia and China as an example. If you look at Russia and you look at the COVID-19 era that we're in, by the end of March, there were more than 110 disinformation campaigns launched from the Kremlin. So probably a lot more than that, but 110 for sure. So that's just using disinformation as a weapon to desensitize people all over the world. If I look at like less restrictive, I think of China and I don't think of disinformation as much, which they're not bad at, but I think of things like censorship, both overt and also economic. And a good example of this would be on the overt side is, if you're playing League of Legends, which is owned by China, and you criticize the camps in China, well, your account may be deleted, or if you're saying things that are not positive for China, you may be shadow banned. And so your reach is far less. So there's a lot of censorship going. Censorship to me is evolving dramatically. And it is something we have to get our head around how to innovate in censorship so we can stop them or slow them down. But that to me is because there are no restrictions for China. They just do what they need to do. So I think there are very different things going on at the same time. And that's how I would answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Our next question is for Bus. In discussing the role that CDM is playing across all aspects and applications of information, is there a component to build non-technical human capacity to increase overall tech and non-tech capability?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Clem, great to hear from you, as always. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about, from at least our perspective, inside CDM, one of the things we look at in that skunkworks role is really addressing across what the DoD, obviously you all know, calls the .mil-PF space. So it can't just be capability development about material solution. And General Cardone hit the nail on the head. Where are the concept of operations? Where are those aspects of policy, organization, et cetera? So I think what you're seeing is the services are really starting to get and military departments get their hands around this. Encouraged, obviously, you see the work being done inside the Army down at First Operations or Special Operations Command. You see the work being done through 16th Air Force and under ACC MAGCOM responsibility in the IW space, the development of the 14F career field inside the Air Force, and then the Navy through NIWIC and other work. And then you align that with the acquisition community side, the PEOs, Army from STRI, EIS to IEW, work within the Air Force by us, PEO, HN, and others. And I think what you're seeing is as the acquisition structure moves more towards digital and agile transformation, it's really going to optimize itself in this space. And what I think is critical, though, is we've got to work the issues of operations and systems design co-emerging together. And I think that'll be critical as we move forward. So yes, I think there's a lot of work. I can say from a non-technical aspect, back in uniform days, I was a knuckle dragging bomber pilot, and I was working with an embedded PSYOPs unit back in '91, pushing leaflet bombs over the berms in Iraq. So the criticality of folks working in the cognitive space from a non-technical perspective will be critical in how we move this all forward. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Bessie. And our next question is for Mr. Joe Kelly. Will there be an outreach effort with other federal agencies, non-IC, to enhance their understanding and appreciation for how they could be impacted through adversary and competitor information warfare activities?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it ties, allows me to drill down on why we have insider risk and acquisition security as a key topic, because that's an area where I think the rest of the non-national security community has woken up to really be exposed to this through things like the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., as we've seen efforts with ByteDance and TikTok and the divestiture that's being required there, as we've seen things, other areas around Tencent, access to Huawei, and also doing the enforcement on access in academia, as we had the case and the Department of Justice charges up at Harvard with the acceptance of foreign funding. So the rest of the world is beginning to the rest of the community is beginning to wake up to this, and there is an opportunity to work through processes. You know, CFIUS, for those that are familiar with it, has, I believe, 9 core agencies and I think 15 overall that are involved in the process, many of whom are not traditional national security people. Folks like Department of Labor has a rep, Office of Science and Technology Policy has a rep. This is where we're getting the opportunity to expand the aperture and get people to recognize this in a different realm. And so we have a number of tools that I think we can involve, and I would certainly look forward at Phoenix Challenge and other venues to find ways to increase the education outside of our traditional national security community. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Our next question isn't addressed to any speakers, so I'm going to read it aloud. What progress is being made across the services to bring the various tribes together to make for a more cohesive effort and leverage the strengths of communities like MISO, EW, cyber, etc.?
So this is Lynn Patrick. I'll answer part of that and then willing to jump in otherwise, but the IO part of 16th Air Force actually is looking at the collective activities of the MISO, also our MILDEC and some of our OPSEC aspects. So 16th Air Force has stood up for that purpose, to look at the convergence of the different functionalities throughout the Air Force and pulling them together and addressing and looking at those things. So 16th Air Force has been up for a year, but I can tell you the legacy NAVs that were pulled together to provide that are steeped in heritage and like you said, the environment of knowing what we've got to do. It's a matter of refining or defining the way we want to push this forward and then get that messaging out. Panels like this are a perfect example, and the environments that Lieutenant General Hawk is involved in and telling that messaging out to the public. We have it, it's there. Underneath the 16th Air Force, we're just looking at a better way to refine it and get it out. So it is being addressed.
I think what's powerful here, go ahead, Austin. Well, I think what's powerful here, building on Lynn's comment, is I think all the services see this. They're all morphing their organizations to do this, but it's going to be things like the Joint IW Engineering Center, things like this that give us a common standardization, because just thinking back to Joint Task Force Ares, they have to be interoperable. In other words, it's not just an Air Force problem, a Navy problem, an Army problem, a Marine problem, or a larger, you take the other intelligence agencies, or, we can go out to the FBI, and there's another number of people at play in this space, obviously in the government, not to mention the private sector. But if there was So first is the organizational design. That will start to drive all kinds of activity in ways that it's not driven now, because most of the information related capabilities you talked about are all actually very long stovepipes. They've been around a long time. They're not new, but they operate in their own line with their own authorities. And what's happened in the technology advancements is it's all becoming one space. And then the advances in the neuroscience, psychiatry, and psychology have made it such that you cannot separate this anymore. If you do, you're going to lose, because there's other people that have converged and have taken advantage of this going forward. So Austin, over to you.
I think the only thing I would add is that this convergence, this network of commonly interested, common development of technologies and capabilities in this space is not going to naturally happen. It's going to take an effort. It's going to take, collaboration. It's going to take the active efforts of folks in the services, the labs, all the organizations to collaborate horizontally and to really all mutually benefit and give us some of the capabilities we're all talking about. And that takes leadership. And having senior leaders across the Department of Defense who are accountable for this. I mean, the recent decision to establish the PIOA under policy, that's useful and helpful, but we need leadership across the service, and we're seeing that. To General Cardone's point, as we see the pressure from our adversaries, kind of turn our heads towards the developing capability in this space. A lot more to go, but again, leadership, and it takes an effort, and it's just not going to naturally happen. Over.
Yeah, I think the wars taught us you could win operationally and lose informationally, and by losing informationally, lose the whole thing. But you won tactically.
Thank you all. The next question isn't referenced to one person, so I'll read it aloud again. It seems that the tools at Tempo for operators with permission to execute is what's lacking. In addition, this is not a government-only space, and private actors coordinating with government seem to be critical. How is this larger engagement planned to happen?
I'll jump on the first part. It's slow because I go back to, unless you can articulate the effect you're going to achieve and have confidence that it's in there, as it goes up the chain, leaders get less and less willing to accept the risk, especially if the blowback could result politically. I'm very blunt with this. When I say politically, like for years, there have been I'll use a cyber example, and then you can just bring it to the information space. Should we attack people's bank accounts? The question is, could they do the same thing to us? And so if you start it, where does this end? And these are the kind of debates that go on up there at the top. So if you say, well, we're going to do this, and you haven't thought through your operational concept, thought through the risk, then the answer is no. But I've seen advances certainly at the tactical level. There was recognition I'll use an example, General Petraeus in the surge, all the way down to very low levels, because he recognized when something happens, you have a window of opportunity to occupy the space with your message. And if it's too slow, you lost. And so there's recognition there. And then how you weave it together at the operational, weave it together at the strategic, I think there's growing recognition because of the threats facing us today. I go on a long time, but I'll stop there. Bob, you probably have some definite opinions on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. Thank you. And it's interesting when you look at bad actors who are private working with countries, they don't just do cyber threats or disinfo. I mean, they might be doing malware and ransomware, and they're making money there. They're good at it. They're over here. They're moving counterfeit drugs. They're over here. They're moving illegal drugs. They don't care, And so if we actually look at the supply chains of bad actors, and I've done this for years now, looking at how counterfeiters work worldwide, looking at how illegal drugs easily come into the United States. It's incredibly easy to fool us at this stage. We have to work together across DINFO. We have to actually be sharing knowledge in ways that will allow us to go after those folks who are acting as the tip of the spear in the proxy networks and put them out of business. and then slow them down. So there's a lot of different techniques that we could be using that work across, I would say, all bad actors.
And to the last point, to close out this question, what are the, how are we going to do this expanded collaborate? That's the purpose for this event. The purpose for Phoenix Challenge, the purpose for what Arliss was talking about, is to create these platforms for collaboration and exposing others to capabilities and to the various efforts underway. After our first session that I mentioned, we did some weeks ago with AFCEA and IPA. There was a whole that illuminated some opportunities for a lot of collaboration to occur with folks who simply didn't know someone else was working on something. And so that's why it's so important to maintain these types of collaboration and transparency platforms for the purposes of establishing the network I spoke about before. Over.
Hey, Austin, this is Buzz. If I can just follow up piece as well, as we as an organization have worked over the years with a lot within industry. I just want to offer this, and I'll be a little bit frank about it, is what needs to be built is trust between the government and commercial industry in this space. I participated for USDI about 4 years ago, before the administration turned over, in a joint effort that was chaired by NSC and the Office of Science Technology Policy within the White House, and it was the Tech Terror Working Group. And the question became, is if you looked at the propaganda and information realm that was being used by ISIS and the VEO organizations, the question was asked, what can we harness from industry to help support? And unfortunately, I would tell you it was a level of talking past each other, as well as a level of, I wouldn't say complete trust, from an industry perspective, where, let's be frank, industry exists to a degree to monetize capability and endure prosperity. And we look at it from the national security realm. And what we need to get to with industry is a set of common and strategic objectives. That prosperity and security are intrinsically linked in this area of strategic competition. And again, how do we work together in alignment towards the same objectives? Over.
Yeah, Buzz, if I could just pile on that for a minute. ISIS was using a lot of US infrastructure. They're using our own social media platforms against us. We have to come to grips with this. And to your point about trust, to me, Snowden really badly damaged trust between the government and the tech sector, which you still feel the effects on today. But it's also not just that, it's the ability of the government to keep secret its data. So they're happy to help the government, but they don't want to be exposed. And there's been too many examples recently of this. So that said, forums like this and working more, we have to have it, because that's where a lot of the structure is. It's not like we have the structure and they have the structure. It's our structure. We're all together in this. I'm done.
Thank you all. Our next question, could the panel talk some on how we operationalize our counter-information influence efforts at different levels, such as strategic, operational, and tactical?
I can comment more generally. When you look at, and this actually embodies cognitive security, you can look at the questions of how do you improve the resilience of the individual population? How might you gain better situational awareness of what's happening? What misinformation, disinformation is being thrown at you online? How do you detect manipulation? And then 3, how do you engage? Once you know who the, let's say the malicious influencer is, what can you do? So at the resilience side, you see examples like Finland has actually a national education program on really media literacy, online media literacy. There's a game, I think it's called Bad News, that will actually help improve psychological resistance against online misinformation. Stanford has a civics online reasoning course. So all these things can certainly help improve from a population level. And then when we look at online in terms of what might be thrown at us, and it's an onslaught of potential disinformation in terms of, let's say, manipulated images and videos, there are efforts underway. Certainly DARPA has its share of programs looking at the detection of manipulated images and videos. This was the media forensics program. That's been expanded now to a new program looking at semantic forensics, whereby in a multimedia sense, can I detect manipulation? Of course, we'd like then to be able to attribute that to an influencer, which then allows potential actions. And I do see what we're learning in terms of contending with social engineering in the context of cyber expands also into the information space. So let me hand it over to someone else who might want to comment.
Yeah, Brian, I'd love to add in there. It's a great question. And so let's take an example like in Ukraine, and you have a lot of, I'd say, Russian disinformation flowing through the oligarch-driven media networks there, just the way it is. So if you counter them, that's not going to work. We can try forever, it's not going to work. But we could do other things like using advanced search techniques, and we can actually be putting out different types of content tagged correctly, and we can drive them off the first screens, and we can actually make them far less effective in reaching people. And so there's all kinds of techniques that we've been using in the private sector forever that no one ever thinks about using on this side. I'm not saying this group doesn't, but we can be more practical there. Then the other point to Dave's question is what we always look at is it a strategic idea? Could search, for example, be used different ways to counter disinformation? Yes. How do you make it operational so you can use it in any part of the world? And tactically, will it actually succeed? And can you measure it and prove it? And so that's what that's just scaling ideas, right? So that's really what this lab would be doing, is looking at, okay, that works. Can we get it there? How do we package it up? Does it give us unique advantage? And let's share it as widely as we can, as fast as we can. And we can be doing that over and over and over again.
Thank you all. Next question isn't directed towards anybody. Is there a central repository known for malign influence campaigns, a living list perhaps?
There are the ingredients to put together what I would call a bad actor library. So any bad actor that has to take a public presence, we can grab it, even if it's not public, but let's just stay with public, and create what I would call a tell library. So not just, all the aliases they use, all the habits they have. And there are plenty of data repositories out there today that with APIs, if they came in and we actually took the time to do it, we could absolutely build a global bad actor library, and we'd be way ahead of most of these folks.
Yeah, I would just add to Bob's comments that ARLIS has as one of its objectives to serve as a repository for data that would be, for example, representative of malign influence campaigns. To serve again, as General Cardone said, this neutral ground, this Switzerland, where people can come and gain these kinds of insights.
Yeah, and Brian, let me just add too, I think this is why we're saying, would that ever be built in the optimal way within government? I think the answer is no. If we built it outside of government, we have much more freedom to build it exactly the right way and then pipe in what is relevant to the appropriate places. So that's an idea just waiting to happen tomorrow.
I agree, Bob. I think there's pieces of this, and I'm thinking like Kathleen Carley's work, Dr. Carley's work. I mean, she's got now it's on a specific element, but she has a huge library, and I know there's others. Herb Lynn, yourself, right? So we should. That's a great idea. We should actually just do this.
Thank you all. Our next question, from a 16th Air Force Joint Force Headquarters Cyber Air Force perspective, how are you looking at pairing IO PSYOPs personnel with cyber operators to combat cyber-enabled disinformation?
So looking at this and trying to address it, I can state one team, one fight from information warfare from the 16th Air Force NAF. Going into how we're looking at pairing and all the details, I probably cannot do that at this time.
I will say what gets us in trouble on this, though, I've talked to Tim Haw this some, is, and Tim, if you're out there, feel free, but it's, the challenge comes is when people define their jobs as in a silo and not like, this is the mission. So sometimes it may be cyber heavy, sometimes it may be IO heavy, sometimes it may be EW heavy, but they all have a role. And the problem comes is when one tries to dominate over the other, and it creates, I call the human factors problem, right? Which actually affects mission accomplishment. And that's what, I think for me, what Tim and Steve Donald were able to do is like absolutely build a team that was just focused on mission and not worried about your branch, your specialty, your whatever, right? We're all focused on taking ISIS down. That's what we're focused on. And
as General Cardone said, a very centered message of it's a partnership. It's a collaboration of many and all to make it work well and better together. It's an effectiveness and efficiency aspect if you look at it too. So just to jump on that.
Yeah, and it comes to mind is the Army Cyber Institute has a report. It's a publicly available report looking at Russian operations in Ukraine and how the Russians would employ EW, cyber, and IO together to sow dissent. So in the opposing force being the Ukrainian forces. So that's worth noting.
Yeah.
I think sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's a great discussion, because I think if we look ahead, we think, gee, the amount of data coming out of the networks will provide opportunities for good actors, but also for adversaries. If we look at the ability of sensors to show more of what we're all about, it's going to be easier than ever to track people. If we look at phones and open source software, quite frankly, it's as easy to hack into phones as it's ever been. So how to protect them is key. There's such a long list of things that we can absolutely nail if we take private and public sector together. And I think like hacking phones is a great example. There's a whole industry set up to feed Samsung with, as an example, with thousands of bugs immediately every time they upgrade their software. So, I wonder what's the equivalent going on in the bad actor world. I'm sure they have that company set up that I don't know about.
And then there is another component of this, Bob, building on what you said, which is, I talked about this idea of an operational environment, which for the Army, think like brigade combat teams and divisions and corps, right? Then you have this information environment, and they don't meet well, right? Often I would say the information environment, where they're like in annexes or appendixes to the plan, and often afterthoughts. They weren't baked in from the beginning. Now that's all changing, but even when we get, all this works perfectly and you have this tremendous plan, you can't forget there's this operational side sitting over here. And a little bit of collaboration with both can have some amazing effects. And often that's just in timing. Because once they find out what you can do, then they look at, oh, hey, we could put this together and it would be fantastic, right? And so that's one thing we worked hard in Ares is to align this with the special operating forces, with the forces on the ground. And of course, they were collaborating with the Iraqis, on how to do this. So I don't want to forget that very important piece there.
That's great.
Thank you all. Our next question is for Austin. Do you still see a role for the JIOWC and the Joint Community to coordinate operations in the IE with the services and combatant commands?
I do. And I know I want to be careful not to get in front of things that are already underway, led by the Joint Staff, being the Joint Information Operations Warfare Center is a chairman's controlled activity under the Joint Staff J3 as they go through their own evolution of how they organize to support many of the emerging efforts that we've talked about here for the Joint Force and with the Joint Staff. But I still see a significant role for what that organization, and now nested with the J3, is supposed to do. We need that help. But I also see a role, certainly a role for them as they in connected with like the Joint Information Warfare Engineering Center with the governance piece. The Joint Staff, it has to execute its role as the integrating, reconciling, and working through all the joint commands issues, particularly in this space. And I think it still remains very important, but it's evolving to address some of the emerging issues, challenges, requirements that we've all been talking about. Over.
Thanks, Austin. Quick comment before the next question. Recently, I've viewed a few platforms/tools that were created by bad actors that are being marketed to identify bad actors on social media and in cyber venues. Some of these tools are marketed to our allies and or free ones used here in the US. What are your opinions on how to mitigate this threat?
So they're not hard to find. And I would actually take everything we can learn from them first before we look to shut them down, because what I'm curious about is there is a lot of innovation going on in scraping of the dark web, a lot of innovation going on in terms of message platforms, where there's more than 3 billion of us in message platforms on a regular basis. Decent amount of innovation going on in terms of exposing censorship, figuring out how to penetrate gaming platforms. So I would want to learn from them first, but then take the appropriate actions to shut them down.
Hey, this is Gus. Let me add to that as well, to Bob's comments. I think we just have to face the reality of the cost of entry into this space is extremely low, depending on level of sophistication. And we're going to have to accept that within the commercial realm, that these are going to exist. The question is building a coherent strategy of how we address. We're not going to prevent them. As Bob indicated, we're going to have to deal with them as they arise. Let's understand them. Let's learn what we can and just anticipate and expect that we're going to have to deal with it moving forward. My bigger concern is the level of sophistication of APTs and other activities that we don't identify, we don't understand, we don't necessarily discover. Building the capabilities to go deeper into the technologies of how we go affect that. And Bob made the point early on is, embracing some of the things within the industry and the commercial space that they've been doing for years, and addressing these things from a little bit of a different paradigm.
Just to dovetail on that, one of the key challenges you see in the cyber arena is on that dark web side, on the malicious hackers, not necessarily state-sponsored hackers, you have a whole ecosystem that's operating. It's a business too. And there's a level of innovation, there's a level of competition that they all pursue in the same direction. It was no surprise that when people began getting their hands around credit card information, we saw the uptick in ransomware, because suddenly that's where the money was. You could actually make more money in a couple of hours grabbing, doing ransomware attacks than other pieces. We have to be mindful of that. And it's one of the key areas of characterizing this environment is understand who we're really dealing with and understand what their incentives are.
Hey, folks, I see we have one more question, and then
Austin, just a comment. I think it's what Joe is raising is a very important point. Is this is gray space type of operations, which of course is the vast. It really is most of what we're dealing with, and that takes us into law enforcement. And even there, the authorities are challenging. I think that's a very interesting topic that probably could be explored more, even as a separate panel. So,
thanks for that. I think. Kayla, we have one more question, and that'll coincide nicely with the timing on this luncheon event.
Perfect. Our last question, how is countering disinformation as a unified effort being considered when different sections involved have different and sometimes limiting authorities and permissions?
On the offensive side, I'd start off with, I think General McChrystal laid it out quite well in Team of Teams, which is you can bring in a military, government, and partner network to work against the network. It's how you organize inside that to be able to make this happen. They all come with their own authorities. They all come, but once you understand that and you can organize it and get oriented on a common goal, which is often the biggest problem, is the overarching goal. There's a lot that can be done here. It's not like you have to change everybody. It's how do you, using your words, Lynn, converge is part of it, but it's the collaboration, the coordination, all of that a lot can happen, and it can happen at speed. And I'll stop there.
And that would include not just our own government, we've already spoken about the private industry, and very importantly, our foreign partners who have shared interests and shared security objectives. So who have access, credibility, and capability and authorities of their own, which would be supportive of our shared interests. So as I mentioned before, and General Cardone just said, it's an all-in proposition. It's a network of networks, and being able to have forums and platforms to be able to collaborate and having a common understanding with a common orientation. That doesn't mean everybody doing the same thing. It means looking at having at least common outputs and certainly common desired outcomes. I think that's the way we ought to pursue this. It's the only practical way to do it. So I think with that, being the time sheriff here, I think we have accomplished what we had hoped to do, is share some of these initial thoughts with a community of interest. And I will tell you, so Kayla, am I correct? Is this event was recorded and it'll be shared on the various sites between AFCEA and IPA for others who weren't able to join during this lunch period. I'm aware that there's many others who want to view the recording. And so with that, I'll turn this over to Rick and Kayla.
Thanks very much, Austin. I really appreciate and want to specifically say thanks to you and all of the panelists who made time today. The time has just flown by, and it's been a fascinating conversation. A lot of great stuff happening in this space that's very, very encouraging. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to our friends at IPA who co-hosted this event today. I did want to share with you about an upcoming event that would be of interest. If we could go to the next slide. If you enjoyed the caliber of thought and the caliber of discussion that happened here, then you don't want to miss the Alamo ACE. This is Alamo AFCEA's signature event each year. We will be virtual this time around, so we're going to have an in-person golf tournament for anyone who's in San Antonio on Monday the 16th and a reception afterwards, but everything else is going to be online. And we've got the commander of Army Futures Command is going to speak to us. We've got, last count, 7 or 8 different 3-star or 3-star equivalents and a whole host of topic areas in addition to a collection of free training opportunities and continuing education. So if you enjoyed this dialogue and the opportunity to bring government and industry and academia together to move national security forward, please don't miss that. Go to our website, alamoafcea.org, to find out more about that. And the wrap-up slide on behalf of Alamo AFCEA and the Information Professionals Association. Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists for sharing their insights, and thanks to each of you for taking the time to join us. Have a great day.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.